All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into the history of the Transcontinental Railroad.
A story that I think a lot of people think they already know, but
Whoa, I bet.
I think today we'll uncover a lot of new information.
Absolutely. And specifically, we're going to focus on the wild rivalry between the two companies racing to build it.
The Central Pacific and the Union Pacific.
Yeah, that's right. And our source material today is the American History Tellers podcast episode, Hell on Wheels.
A very evocative title, I have to say.
For sure, and they throw us right into the thick of it in 1866.
Yeah, that's right in the heart of the action.
Right in the middle of the race. And, it's fascinating because this story isn't just about laying track.
Oh, absolutely not. It's so much bigger than that.
Right. So what are we really looking at here?
Well, it's about the forces that were shaping America in the 1860s. Westward expansion, of course, the rise of industrialization, this clash of cultures all happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Wild West on steroids, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So let's set the scene right. It's 1866, the Civil War has just ended, and the U.S. government is like, hey, we got to connect these coasts.
They had a very strong motivation.
Yes, they were highly motivated, and they're basically saying, hey, Central Pacific, hey, Union Pacific, you guys make this happen and we'll give you a bunch of stuff.
Land grants, mineral rights, bonds, and all of these incentives were tied to mileage.
Right, so the more track you lay, the more money you make.
Exactly. It basically created a race where every single mile laid was worth a small fortune.
So this wasn't just like a friendly competition?
Oh, no, no, no. This was cutthroat. Every inch mattered.
I can imagine. So we've got the Central Pacific pushing east from California, and they're facing the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Can you imagine trying to build a railroad through those mountains in the 1860s?
It blows my mind. Like, how did they even begin to tackle that?
Well, that's what makes the Central Pacific story so compelling. The geography dictated their challenges. Harsh winters, avalanches, and they were literally blasting through solid granite.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was slow, dangerous work. Their progress was agonizingly slow.
I bet. And who are the main players on the Central Pacific side?
Well, you've got Collis Huntington. He was the VP, known for his business savvy and I would say maybe cutthroat tactics.
Ah, the brains of the operation.
Yeah, you could say that. Then there was Charles Crocker, the construction chief, the guy who actually figured out how to get it done.
So the hands-on leader.
Exactly. And of course, you can't forget James Strobridge, the crew boss.
Now he sounds like someone you wouldn't want to mess with.
He was a tough, demanding leader, definitely old school, not afraid to push his workers to their limits.
And those workers were.
A lot of them, a huge portion of the Central Pacific workforce were Chinese immigrants.
Wow. That's something I think a lot of people don't realize.
Their story is often overlooked,
Yeah.
but they were absolutely essential to building this railroad.
And how were they treated? It was the 1860s, not exactly known for its progressive labor practices.
No, sadly not. They faced terrible prejudice, dangerous working conditions, and were paid significantly less than their white counterparts.
It's hard to imagine how they endured all of that.
It's a testament to their strength and resilience, but it also highlights the injustice that was so prevalent at the time.
And this treatment eventually led to a pretty significant event, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's impossible to talk about the Central Pacific without talking about the Chinese worker strike of 1867.
Thousands of those workers walked off the job demanding better conditions, better pay.
Exactly. They wanted to be paid the same as white workers, $40 a month. Which, even that wasn't a lot, but it was the principle of the matter.
It was about equality.
Exactly. They also wanted shorter work days and an end to the harassment they were facing.
That takes a lot of courage to stand up like that, especially when you're already in such a vulnerable position.
It really does. It challenges that stereotype of the passive Chinese immigrant. They knew their value, and they were willing to fight for it.
What was the company's response? I can't imagine they were thrilled about this.
Well, Crocker, remember, the construction chief, he was not a man to be trifled with.
Oh, I bet.
He actually cut off their food supply.
Wow, really? That's cold.
It was a brutal tactic, basically trying to starve them back to work.
And did it work?
Well, in the short term, yes, the strike eventually collapsed.
But
It had a lasting impact. Even though they didn't achieve their immediate demands, the strike showed the company that they couldn't just exploit these workers without consequence.
they had some power.
They did. And it forced the Central Pacific to at least acknowledge their importance to the project.
It's amazing how, even in those conditions, people can still find a way to make their voices heard.
It's a testament to the human spirit. Even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles, there's always a desire to fight for what's right.
Absolutely. So we've got the Central Pacific battling mountains and labor disputes. But what's going on with the Union Pacific during all of this? They're racing westward across the Great Plains, but I imagine they had their own set of challenges.
Oh, you better believe it. The episode does a great job highlighting how each company faced very distinct obstacles. While the Central Pacific struggled with geography, the Union Pacific was increasingly coming into conflict with Native American tribes.
And these weren't just abstract conflicts, right? I mean, the railroad represented a very real threat to their way of life.
Oh, absolutely. The railroad was a symbol of westward expansion, which meant encroachment on their lands, the destruction of the buffalo herds that were so vital to their survival. Their entire way of life was at stake.
So, how did the Union Pacific deal with this growing tension?
Well, their leadership included Thomas Durant. He was the head of the company, a bit of a, well, let's just say he was a complex character.
Ah, one of those robber baron types.
He definitely played the game hard.
Mm-hmm.
You also had Grenville Dodge, their chief engineer, a very capable leader.
More of the hands-on type?
Yeah, you could say that. And then you had the Casement brothers, Jack and Dan, who were in charge of actually laying the track. They were facing increasing attacks from Native Americans trying to defend their land.
And these weren't just small-scale skirmishes, right?
No, not at all. Things escalated, culminating in the Plum Creek derailment in 1867. A passenger train was attacked, and several people were killed. It was a stark reminder of just how dangerous this project could be.
A real tragedy and a sign of just how high the stakes were for everyone involved.
Absolutely. It was a clash of cultures, a clash of values, and unfortunately, it often resulted in violence.
So how did they try to resolve this conflict?
Well, a peace conference was held at North Platte that same year, 1867.
Did it work?
It's a good faith effort, but ultimately it failed to achieve any lasting peace.
Why not?
You had Native American leaders pleading for the railroad to stop its advance, trying to explain how it was destroying their way of life.
And what was the government's response?
The government's stance was basically, the railroad is happening whether you like it or not.
So a classic case of two sides talking past each other.
Exactly, a clash of worldviews. It was a microcosm of the larger conflict that was happening across the West.
So by the end of 1867, we have two companies pushing forward, relentlessly driven by government incentives, and of course, this fierce desire to beat each other.
And they're about to enter a whole new chapter of the race as we head into 1868.
A chapter filled with even more drama and intrigue.
And some seriously questionable decisions on both sides.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about that.
As we roll into 1868, the race is really starting to heat up.
Like things are going into overdrive.
Yeah, the competition intensifies. Both companies realize that time is running out.
I bet the pressure was immense.
Oh, absolutely. Every mile the competition gained was a mile they lost. And that meant less money, less land, less everything.
It was a zero-sum game.
Exactly. And it led to some, let's just say, creative decisions.
Oh boy, I'm intrigued already.
So the Central Pacific, desperate to make up for lost time, they decide to prioritize speed over quality.
So they're basically saying, to heck with craftsmanship, just get those tracks laid.
Pretty much their treasurer actually sent a message saying basically, build the cheapest railroad possible as long as it passes inspection.
Wow, so they're cutting corners.
Big time. But they were under immense pressure to catch up.
I guess when millions of dollars are on the line, you do what you gotta do.
Right. Or at least that's how they saw it. But
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the long-term implications of that approach,
For sure, for sure. But what about the Union Pacific? What are they up to during this time?
Well, they were focused on exploiting the terrain to their advantage.
What do you mean?
So remember, the government was offering more money for track laid in mountainous areas.
Right, right.
So the Union Pacific, they set their sights on the Wyoming mountains.
Clever, those mountains meant more money for them.
Exactly. They weren't just laying track, they were strategically choosing routes that would maximize their profits.
It's like they were playing the system.
In a way, yeah, they knew how to work the rules to their advantage.
So both companies are kind of operating in this gray area, huh?
Yeah, you could say that they were both willing to push the boundaries of what was acceptable to gain an edge.
It's all about winning at this point.
Winning and money, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where Collis Huntington, the VP of the Central Pacific, really shows his cunning.
Oh, this is going to be
This
good.
guy, he was a master manipulator, a real shrewd operator.
What did he do?
All right, so remember that clause in the government agreement that allowed companies to grade 300 miles ahead of their actual track laying?
Vaguely, yeah.
Well, Huntington, he decides to exploit this to the fullest.
Oh, boy, how so.
He submits a map to the Interior Secretary showing the Central Pacific way farther along than they actually were.
He basically lied.
He created a fictional reality on paper And you know what? It worked.
He pulled it off.
He got the grading approved,
Mm-hmm.
and by doing so, they essentially claimed a massive chunk of Utah.
What? That's huge.
It was a major strategic victory. They secured access to those valuable coal deposits and control of the route near Salt Lake City.
The Union Pacific must have been
Oh,
furious.
they felt completely cheated. It was a major blow to their plans, and it just fueled the rivalry even more.
So now we've got both companies in Utah heading straight for each other.
It's the ultimate showdown in the race for the Transcontinental Railroad.
I can't wait to see how this all ends. All right, we're back, and the tension is palpable. Last we left off, the Central Pacific and Union Pacific were on a collision course in Utah, both vying for that prime real estate.
It's like a Wild West showdown, you know? Two gunslingers facing off at high noon.
Except these gunslingers are wielding railroad ties and political clout instead of six-shooters.
Right. And just like in those old westerns, there's a lot of strategizing, posturing, trying to outmaneuver the opponent.
So both companies are in Utah racing towards each other, but what's actually happening? What are they doing?
Well, there's this whole behind-the-scenes game going on. Each company's trying to figure out the best way to get the most lucrative sections of the remaining route.
So it's a chess match as much as it is a race.
Exactly. And it's not just happening behind closed doors either. This rivalry is playing out in the public eye as well.
Oh, I bet the newspapers were having a field day with this.
Oh, absolutely. The newspapers are filled with stories about the race. It's fueling this national excitement. Some of these key figures are becoming celebrities.
It's like the Super Bowl of railroad building.
That's a great analogy. Everyone's eager to see who comes out on top.
Yeah.
But amidst all this excitement, it's easy to forget about the workers who are actually out there laying the track mile after grueling mile.
Yeah, they're the ones actually doing the backbreaking work. What were their conditions like during this final push?
It's something the episode does a really good job of highlighting. This whole monumental feat, it was built on the backs of thousands of laborers.
And many of them immigrants.
Exactly. Facing harsh conditions, low pay, constant danger.
And for the Chinese workers on the Central Pacific, the challenges were especially brutal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they had to cross Nevada's 40-mile desert.
I've heard of that. That's a stretch of just barren wasteland.
Scorching heat, lack of water, threat of disease. It's a real testament to their resilience, their determination.
It's a sobering reminder that progress often comes at a very human cost.
Yeah, and it's something we should always keep in mind. But all this effort, all this hardship, surely they must be getting close to the finish line.
Well, yeah, closer, but building a railroad this fast, it's inevitably going to lead to some compromises.
Especially in safety.
So as the pressure mounts, safety takes a back seat.
In a way, yeah. Both companies, they start pushing their workers even harder, and you start seeing a series of accidents, fatalities.
That's awful.
It really highlights the dark side of this whole endeavor. You hear stories about trains derailing, bridges collapsing, workers getting injured or killed in explosions.
Tragic. So while all of this is happening out west, what's the government doing? I mean, they must be figuring out where these two lines are actually going to meet.
Right. They can't just build past each other forever. And the meeting point, it becomes a major point of contention.
I bet. I mean, controlling that connection, it would have brought some serious economic advantages.
Absolutely. So there's this whole other layer of competition happening, but this time it's happening in the halls of power.
So lots of backroom deals, lobbying, political maneuvering.
Oh yeah, each company trying to influence the government's decision.
So where did they finally decide to meet?
Well, after months of negotiations, the government chooses Promontory Summit, Utah.
Okay, and that brings us to that historic moment, May 10th, 1869.
The two lines finally meet at Promontory Summit, and the golden spike is driven.
Marking the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, it's a moment of national celebration, this symbol of American ingenuity, perseverance.
Right. But we also have to remember those complexities behind this achievement, the human cost, the environmental impact, the legacy of exploitation.
It's a mixed bag for sure. The Transcontinental Railroad, it was a turning point in American history, no doubt. Connected the nation, fueled economic growth, opened up the West, but it came at a significant cost. What are your final thoughts on all of this?
I think the story of the Transcontinental Railroad is a complex one. It's a story of ambition and innovation, but also a story of exploitation. It forces us to grapple with some difficult questions, like, was it all worth it? What can we learn from this?
It's a lot to ponder. It's incredible how a deep dive into something like the Transcontinental Railroad can really reveal so much about who we are, both as a nation and as individuals. Thanks for joining us on this journey.